He has a broad sense of where he wants to get to, but he doesn't have a strategy as defined by a clear roadmap for how to get there. So he tries this, and if it works, he maybe tries a bit more, and if it doesn't, he thinks of something else. And this is one of the problems, because I think we have a tendency to tie ourselves in knots, precisely trying to work out what is the grand strategy, when the truth of the matter is the Russians are just trying stuff and seeing what happens.
Will Putin ultimately be successful? Well, Mark Galeotti, author of the newly revised book We Need to Talk About Putin, claims that understanding the man can better stop him from winning. And I'm delighted to say that Mark Galeotti joins me now. Mark, good morning.
Hello there.
Thanks very much for being with us. Look, another long battle in Pokrovsk. There's the odd drone attack on Ukrainian infrastructure. There are drones flying around harassing civilians. Is this the kind of war that Vladimir Putin wants to be fighting?
It's not the one that he intended to be fighting. Remember, when he went into Ukraine back in 2022, he was convinced it wasn't really going to be the start of any kind of a major war, but just simply a brief and necessary way of showing the Ukrainians who was boss. It didn't work out that way. But on the other hand, I think that it's a war that he's come to terms with. He can't afford to be defeated or to be seen to be defeated. And from his point of view, well, he can grind away, and he believes, and I don't think anyone's willing to tell him otherwise, that ultimately Russia can take pain longer than Ukraine can, and that he can impose some kind of an ugly peace on Kyiv.
So look, one of the myths that the West has about Putin is that he's this sort of brilliant evil mastermind, three heads a game and three steps ahead in the game of chess, and it may even be 4D chess. You argue that Vladimir Putin actually never knows his next move, that it's kind of sort of it's one lurch to the next.
Yeah, I mean, again, if we're playing the parallels, he's not a chess grandmaster. He probably doesn't really play chess, but he is a judo fighter. And it's that sense of you go into the ring, you have a sense of how you might want to take on your opponent, but essentially you're looking for an opportunity. And when you see that opportunity, you have to strike fast. And this is very much Putin's approach. He has a broad sense of where he wants to get to, but he doesn't have a strategy as defined by a clear roadmap for how to get there. So he tries this, and if it works, he maybe tries a bit more, and if it doesn't, he thinks of something else. And this is one of the problems, because I think we have a tendency to tie ourselves in knots, precisely trying to work out what is the grand strategy, when the truth of the matter is the Russians are just trying stuff and seeing what happens.
So look, I mean, if sanctions are having an impact and putting him in a bit of a corner, if he's given up on his plans on the sort of the steamrolling victory that he used to appear to want, the more he gets constrained, the more almost desperate Russia becomes. Does that in fact weaken him, or is he sort of getting ever more secure, ever stronger?
In many ways, he's stronger right at the moment, simply because no one can really break ranks without being seen as a traitor. I mean, a war is a great opportunity for a dictator to justify whatever repressive measures. And also, let's be honest, a lot of Russians who really didn't want Russia to be in this war, but nonetheless, if it is in this war, they would rather Russia win than lose. But in the longer term, his regime is I would suggest, getting more and more brittle. It's not that it's beginning to near any kind of collapse or whatever, but its resilience, its capacity to respond to the unexpected. And one thing that is guaranteed in politics is there will be unexpected developments. That is where it's beginning to suffer. The problem with prediction is we have no idea if the next Black Swan event will be next week or in 5 years' time. But nonetheless, when that happens, as we saw with the mutiny from the Wagner mercenaries, actually, the Russian regime is not very good. It's not nimble. It doesn't have the resources to respond effectively and quickly.
You say Putin is now a caricature of himself, and we've seen this week his 2026 Vladimir Putin calendar, which has loads of new muscly pictures of him, albeit none of them, I think this time, are bare-chested. Is this part of what you mean?
Well, I mean, it's part of it. I mean, the caricature thing is that when he invaded in 2022, that was actually quite uncharacteristic of someone who'd always been quite risk averse. And as we tried to unpick quite what had happened, I think it became clear that, like so many authoritarian leaders, over time, he gets more and more isolated, more and more surrounded by yes men and cronies, less willing to be presented with the realities of the world outside, and more convinced of his own genius. So yes, it's that Putin is now, as I say, sort of in that respect, Putin squared, even more himself. But when it comes to that delightful calendar, I think, again, the problem there is that Putin can't break away from his old self, his old persona. He was this macho ex-KGB teetotaler, contrast with his predecessor, the alcoholic and aging and ailing Boris Yeltsin, was striking. Now, though, on the one hand, he is not that guy anymore. He is not the one who's out in reality scoring the goals in ice hockey and winning the judo matches fairly. But he's stuck with that. And frankly, Russians themselves, there's an increasing vein of subversive humor on social media, for example, in which you can't attack Putin, but precisely by praising him in such ridiculous, exaggerated ways, you can still demonstrate what you think. And, well, there can't be, after all, a Putin calendar in which he's looking withered and wondering when his next cup of tea is going to be. So they have to keep recycling the old threadbare propaganda.
There's a line in that calendar that says something along the lines of Russia recognises no borders. Not just Russia doesn't recognise its current borders, it recognises no borders. What is his big vision for Russia? Because if it's not trying to rebuild the USSR, although some people think it is, and it's not trying to re-establish the Russian Empire from even longer ago, and it's not just trying to sort of security inside the borders Russia has, what is the sort of the huge kind of geopolitical success that he has in mind?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think when it comes down to it, I think Putin is very much a 19th century geopolitician from the age of empire and great nations. He sees the world essentially as a game board in which there are a handful of players, and the rest of the countries in the world, really the only question is who gets to control them. And so from his point of view, yeah, he's not looking to reconquer Finland or wherever else. But he wants to establish Russia as a great power. And what a great power has, in his view, again, very 19th century, it's not about soft power or anything like that. It's, a sphere of influence. Countries, and here he definitely regards Ukraine as being such, who have to recognize that they are basically within the sway of the great power. A great power gets to break the rules with impunity. It's this kind of notion. And this is why he, ironically enough, thinks he's defending Russia. It's not just a rhetorical thing. He's wrong, of course, but nonetheless, he thinks that whenever we don't give Russia that kind of power in the world, we are somehow trying to undermine his country. So essentially, his idea is a 19th century great power that everyone genuflects to.
Can he afford to end the war? Because as we understand it, the defence security share of the Russian federal budget is past 40%. There are whole towns that are devoted towards military production, drone production. There are huge numbers of people serving in the armed forces. Does the economy just sort of fall over if the war ends tomorrow?
It doesn't. I mean, if, for example, the war ended and Russia said, right, we're not going to be building any more tanks and missiles, then absolutely this would be catastrophic. But let's be clear, Putin is not about to become a pacifist. He will want to rebuild his armed forces, which have been ravaged by this war. So for years, the defense factories will still be running, and there'll be a chance to slowly transition to a slightly more rational balance. So he can afford to end the war, but there certainly are downsides, the greatest of which is not actually the economy. It's 1 million or so traumatized, scarred soldiers, many of whom feel that they were essentially inveigled into signing up on false pretenses, who will come back dislocated and angry, and no one really knows what they're going to do. So yes, he can end the war, but on the other hand, there are sufficient reasons why he's not desperate to end it, which is why he's willing to continue the fight.
Look, finally, Mark, he has no obvious successor, and after the killing of Alexei Navalny, there's no obvious sort of figure of opposition. What does a post-Putin future look like?
Well, again, your guess is as good as mine, but I suppose I'm meant to be the one who has the answer. Look, there is no single individual, at the moment at least, who can step in straight into Putin's shoes with the same kind of authority. So what we're going to get is what we tend to find with the death of some very powerful personalistic figure, like, for example, Stalin. behind the scenes wheeling and dealing between different individuals and interest groups trying to form a coalition. And that's a good thing because coalition politics tends to drag politics towards the middle a little. And what we're going to see is a shift down to the next generation below. We're not going to see one of Putin's 70-year-old cronies taking over, almost certainly. It'll be one of the 50-something, 60-something-year-old politicians. And perversely, I think that's a good thing. Not because these are nice people, and they're not Democrats. They are essentially ruthless, opportunist kleptocrats who just want to be able to steal and then enjoy the products of that. But they will want to probably improve relations with the West because it's bad for business. So on the whole, although some people think we might get something worse, and it's possible, I think that for Russia, for Ukraine, and for the rest of us, a post-Putin future is something to look forward to.
Mark Galeotti, thanks so much. Always great to speak to you. And the revised edition of Mark Galeotti's We Need to Talk About Putin, published by Ebury, is available to buy right now.